All right, y'all. I want to welcome you back to Pastor's Point of View. And unfortunately, we had to miss a couple of weeks, Brother Jim.
Yes.
I've had I don't know what it is with this month of October, but a very intense traveling schedule, which I think is now kind of dissipating.
Yeah.
And also, I was sick for one of those particular weeks, you'll recall.
Yeah.
So we've been kind of choppy in our consistency, I guess you could put it that way. But we're back today, and the Lord willing, we're going to be back next week also.
Amen.
Although we may have to meet at a slightly earlier time during the week, but we'll let folks know.
We're flexible.
We're flexible. And if folks will remember, we've been doing a prophecy update.
Yeah.
And you may have to dial back a little bit into the archives to recall what we're talking about. But one of the things we dealt with was the whole subject of the red heifer, you'll recall,
Yes.
and its significance. And then I had to do one by myself because I think you were out one Sunday, not Sunday, but Friday, and I did it on the Surveillance Society and how that fits in with Bible prophecy.
Yeah.
And so today we're going to do part 3 of the trilogy, and we're going to talk about the nations against Israel.
Awesome.
And let me sort of remind people why we're doing this little trilogy on called Prophecy Update. If we can put up slide number 1, let me get you to read, if I could, Brother Jim, Matthew 16 and verses 1 through 3.
All right, Matthew 16, 1 through 3, from the New American Standard Version, the 95 Update. The Pharisees and Sadducees came up, and testing Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. But he replied to them, "When it is evening, you say, 'It will be fair weather, for the sky is red.' And in the morning, 'There will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening.' Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times?"
So I like to use this when we do these prophecy updates just to remind people that Jesus held first century Israel's leadership responsible for understanding the seasons
That's right.
and the prophetic time they were in, because there was a lot of prophecies about his first coming.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I would say this, there are more prophecies about his second coming.
Yes.
So by my way of thinking, our accountability to understand the season of time that we're living in increases.
Amen.
And if you can put up slide number 2, folks might remember our prophecy outline, just as our model, so folks know where we're coming from. There's coming upon the earth a rapture.
Yes.
And
Praise the
that's going
Lord.
to be followed by a 7-year tribulation period.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think that the 7-year tribulation period can just, boom, instantaneously appear. The stage has to be set for it.
That's right.
The rapture can occur at any moment. But the
Yes.
7-year tribulation period, the stage has to be set. And so what we believe is happening today in our world is the furniture, so to speak, is being set forth for that final drama. And
I like that illustration.
And we could even see the furniture sort of being set in place for the play or the drama this side of the rapture.
Yeah.
So that's the angle we're coming from. We don't really believe, like a lot of folks, that prophecies are being fulfilled right now.
Mm-hmm.
Except the prophecies that relate to the church, we believe are happening now.
Sure.
Jesus said, "I will build my church," etc.
Right.
I mean, those are prophecies that are being fulfilled now.
Yes.
But what is happening in terms of prophetic fulfillment related to the tribulation period is yet future, but we can see the world stage being prepared for that, can't we?
Right. Right.
And we also like to use, if we can put up slide number 3, the chessboard. Just as you have to have, the chess pieces arranged the right way before a chess game can occur.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to have the world stage set up a particular way before the end times drama can occur.
Yes.
So that's the analogy of the chessboard, that we like to use. And then one other quick verse we like to use to kind of inaugurate this subject is Galatians 4 and verse 4. Would you mind reading that to us?
Yes, sir.
That would be slide number 4. Galatians 4 verse 4, slide number 4.
Mm-hmm. Galatians 4:4. But when the fullness of the time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law.
So Jesus was not in the first coming anyway, was not just dropped into history coincidentally. The world stage
Amen.
was set up for him to be dropped into
That's
history.
right. That's right.
And if that's true related to the first coming, why can't the world stage be set up related to the second coming?
Yeah.
So that's the spirit in which we offer these remarks concerning the prophecy updates that we've been doing.
Yes.
So one of the signs of the end to take a look at, in addition to the red heifer and the surveillance society and the stage being set for those things, is what I would call the world against Israel.
Amen. Mm-hmm.
And we want to look at this in three parts today, if we could. And if this bleeds over into next week, we'll do that. But here's our goal. Number one, the alliance is forming against Israel as we speak. Number two, we want to look at something that's on the table, and everybody's eager to discover what the final details are going to look like. Trump's Middle East peace plan, which I believe fits directly into Bible prophecy, as we'll be explaining. And the third issue I want to look at is the Golan Heights.
Yes.
And what is the legal obligation of the United States should the Golan Heights be invaded? And this was something I didn't know until about a month ago. And I saw this and I thought, aha, that's a potential scenario whereby the Ezekiel 38-39 prophecy could easily be fulfilled that way.
Wow.
So we'll look at those three issues. But let's start off with the world against Israel. The alliance is forming against Israel. And I want to take folks back, if we can put up slides 5 and then 6 as we're reading these. I want to take folks back to a prophet that prophesied about 500 years before the time of Christ. And folks need to understand how accurate this prophet's prophecies were.
Yes.
For example, I think it's in Zechariah 12, verse 10, it says Messiah would be pierced. And you think how ridiculous that prophecy probably sounded at the time, because the Jews, when they executed people, they didn't pierce them.
Right.
They stoned them to death.
Right.
But yet, Zechariah 12:10 says the Messiah will be pierced. Well, when Bible prophecy looks ridiculous, you just give it enough time, and history will catch up with what the Bible says, because God's omniscient, right?
That's right.
And we know that from history, Rome came to power about 63 BC over the land of Israel and usurped from the Jews the right to execute their own criminals. And Rome, of course, executed people via crucifixion. So Jesus could not have been killed by the first century Israeli government of that day. He had to be turned over to the Romans for execution. And lo and behold, how did he die? He was pierced. And this is a prophet that prophesied 500 years. That's 2 times the duration of the United States of America when you think about it, before the time of Christ. And this same prophet made predictions not just about the first coming, but the second coming. And if we're going to pay attention to how literally and accurately his prophecies concerning the first coming were fulfilled, why would God switch horses in midstream? Wouldn't the second coming prophecies be fulfilled the same way? But if you can read those 2 verses, Zechariah 12:3 and Zechariah 14:2. Once again, these are slides 5 and 6.
All right, Zechariah 12:3. It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it.
So it's very clear, we've got the underlined portions there, all peoples, all nations against Israel, and specifically Jerusalem in the last days. You mind reading the parallel passage, Zechariah 14:2.
All right, chapter 14, verse 2. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half of the city exiled, but the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city.
So the last time I checked, Brother Jim, all means all.
That's what it means.
Now, I was in Canada recently at a prophecy conference, and people asked, well, where is Canada in Bible prophecy? And I said, well, it's right there.
Yeah.
Zechariah 12:3, Zechariah 14, verse 2. And as an American, it makes me sad to also announce that
That's
people
right.
say, where is America in Bible prophecy? Well, she's right there in Zechariah
Mhm.
12:3 and 14, verse 2, because the prophet Zechariah predicts all nations.
All
That would
nations.
even include the late great USA, wouldn't it?
That's right.
Will ultimately turn against the nation of Israel.
Yep.
If we can put up graphic number 7, you see there a giant map, and what you'll see is the nations that will invade Israel in the last days. And there are many, many nations mentioned. I try to cover these in my book, if you
Mhm.
don't mind holding that up when we get a good camera angle. But you see Meshach, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah, which would be Turkey. Rosh would be Russia. Magog, Central Asia. Persia, Iran. Cush, Sudan. Put, Libya. And if you want proof as to why these ancient names mirror these modern countries, then my book, The Middle East Meltdown, can help you with that. But one of the things that people do to us to ridicule our position is they say, well, why do you think uh, Russia is going to invade in the end times? And they'll sort of make fun of us and they'll say, you just think that because Rosh in Ezekiel 38 and 39 sounds like Russia.
Yeah. Right.
And the reality of the situation is, if we can put up slide number 9. I know I skipped number 8. We'll go back to 8 in just a minute. But if you could put up slide number 9, an individual by the name of Wilhelm Gesenius, all the way back in 1847,
Yeah.
identified Rosh as Russia in Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Yes.
And he did this in his, let's see, Hebrew called the Lexicon.
Yes.
You want to go ahead and read that quote?
Sure. He referring to this word Rosh, he's saying it's a pronoun of a northern nation, or a proper name rather, mentioned with Tubal and Meshach. And then he says, undoubtedly the Russians, who are mentioned by the Byzantine writers of the 10th century under the name the Ross, dwelling in the north of Taurus, as dwelling on the river Ra or Volga.
Now, people need to understand that Gesenius is no slouch.
No.
He is the father of what's called modern-day lexicography,
That's right.
which is the science and art of compiling Hebrew
Yes.
and ancient dictionaries.
Yeah, he knew his
And
stuff.
he made this identification based on Byzantine writers of the 10th century. And he made this identification in 1847. That was long before the Communist Revolution, which I think happened in 1917. In fact, Russia was a Christian Orthodox country at the time he made that statement.
Yeah.
And this was long before the rise of what we call the modern-day Soviet Union, which went onto the ash heap of history, but now it's been revitalized. But before that whole country arose as a nuclear superpower, he made that identification.
It's fascinating.
So it's a lot more complicated than just saying Rosh sounds like Russia. Let's use that to make it fit. And one of the things that's very interesting is not just Ezekiel predicting the identical nations that will invade Israel, but Ezekiel also predicts alliances forming between these nations. In fact, going back to slide 8, we have a quote here from Rhodes, a wonderful Bible teacher, in his book Northern Storm Arising, page 90. And he makes a comment there about alignments that are taking place amongst these nations as we speak. You mind reading that quote to us?
This is what Ron Rhodes says. The unique alignment of nations described in Ezekiel 38 and 39 has never occurred in the past, but it is occurring now.
See, what's so interesting about Ezekiel's prophecies is that it's not just the nations appearing with a hostile intent towards Israel, which is stage setting.
Yes.
It's the chessboard being arranged.
Yes.
I've documented that, as have many others, in my book, Middle East Meltdown. It's not just those nations appearing. It's the alliances forming amongst those nations.
Yes.
And in fact, there are so many news items related to these alliances, it would take a full-time job just to keep up with it.
Right.
But let me just briefly talk about two. Uh, Ezekiel predicts an entity called Put, or Libya, aligned with Rosh or Russia invading Israel in the last days. So it's not that surprising, is it, that Rosh or Russia would enter into an alliance with what we call Put, or modern-day Libya.
Right.
And in fact, we have a Fox News article to that effect entitled "Russia Sends Troops and Missiles into Libya
Yeah.
in Bid to Enforce Stranglehold on the West. Putin," this is fascinating to me, "wants to make Libya his new Syria."
Yeah. Yeah.
See, the big three, we'll talk about them in a minute, are perched right now in Syria, Israel's northern border. And Putin likes his position there because it's probably easy to invade Israel from that location.
Yeah.
And now he's saying he wants to make Libya his new Syria. So would you mind reading that paragraph from this Fox News article?
All right.
And think about what Ezekiel saw. He saw these nations appearing. He saw the alliances forming.
Yeah.
And that's what you're seeing perpetually in your headlines.
That's right. All right, here's what the article says. Russia is moving troops and missiles into Libya in a bid to enforce a new stranglehold on the West. British Prime Minister Theresa May has been warned. Intelligence chief have told Mrs. May that Vladimir Putin wants to make the war-torn North African country his new Syria. And seizing control of the biggest illegal immigration route to Europe is seen as Moscow's primary goal. 2 Russian military bases are already now up and running in the coastal towns of Tobruk and Benghazi, using the cover of the controversial Russian private military company, the Wagner Group, which already has outposts there. Russia's devastating Kalibr anti-ship missiles and state-of-the-art S-300 air defense missile systems are also now believed to be on the ground in Libya. The Kremlin has sided with Libya's most powerful warlord, General Khalifa Haftar, and is also supplying his troops with heavy equipment. Haftar, who leads the Libyan National Army, is the de facto military ruler of much of eastern Libya.
Now, Libya has shown up twice on my radar screen in my lifetime. You remember Gaddafi was from Libya. Remember he set off some bombs in the 1980s. And I think it was some discotheques in Germany.
Yes.
And Ronald Reagan around 1986 dealt with him in a very aggressive
Sure
manner.
did.
And we didn't hear from Gaddafi for a few decades.
No, we didn't.
And that's what we call peace through strength.
Whack-a-mole.
Absolutely. And then you also remember Benghazi. Remember what happened there, how they attacked our embassy on September 11th, interesting date, just prior to the, I think it was to the 2012 election. And the Obama administration got out in front of everybody and told everybody it was some B-rated video that caused this. So it's very interesting. And Benghazi is where? It's in Libya. So Ezekiel predicted that Libya would be a trouble spot in the last days, and there they are in our news. And then, based on this Fox News article, now you've got a coalition formed between Rosh and Russia and Libya. And in fact, you actually have military bases of a Russian variety operating in Libya. And people ask me, well, how do you know we're living in the last days? Think of how improbable it would be for Ezekiel to predict this.
He could not know this.
How many times in your life can you be struck by lightning? Now, one of the nations that is predicted to play a role in Ezekiel's prophecy, and I document it in my book, The Middle East Meltdown, is Cush, or the Sudan. Now, the Sudan is the location of one of the worst genocides, racial genocides happening really in human history, called the Darfur Genocide. So Sudan is raising its head as a trouble spot, exactly like Ezekiel saw. And then what you see developing is a coalition is forming between Rosh and Russia
Yes.
Russia being one of those players, and also the Sudan or Kush. And you see, the Sudan is in a lot of trouble with the International Criminal Court because of this genocide. And who are they going to for help? They're going to Russia or Rosh. And so you see the coalition forming between Russia or Rosh and the Sudan and Kush. And then recently I ran into this Middle East Monitor article from July 16th, 2018, fairly recent article. I don't bore people with stuff that's not fairly recently. And the title of it was Russia and Sudan Look to Develop Military Cooperation.
Yes.
I mean, that's exactly what Ezekiel 38 and 39 is talking about. Would you mind reading those, what do we got, 2 paragraphs
Okay.
on that subject?
Happy to. Russian President Vladimir Putin met with his Sudanese counterpart, Omar al-Bashir, on Saturday, with both leaders pledging to develop military cooperation in the near future, the Sudan Tribune has reported. We have good opportunities to develop relations in a wide range of sectors, including defense technology, said Putin. This cooperation is developing. He noted a substantial growth in trade and an increase in Russian wheat exports to Sudan. Al-Bashir hailed Russia for encouraging shifts in defense technology and military cooperation. We see big exchanges between specialists in Russia and Sudan, he told Putin. A large number of Russian specialists work in our country, and this is why we praise highly the role that your country plays in preparing Sudanese military personnel. The presidents are expected to meet again in September to discuss ways to develop agricultural cooperation and enhance tourism. Al-Bashir has also called for the establishment of a Russian bank in Sudan to support further financial integration. The two leaders last met in November in the Russian city of Sochi, with both expressing a desire to enhance military ties. At the time, al-Bashir even offered to construct an airbase for Russia on the Red Sea coast. The government of Khartoum hopes to enhance Russian investments in Sudan, especially in the gold, oil, and gas fields, and to use the income to fund the modernization of its army's weapons. Al-Bashir was in Moscow to attend the final of the 2018 World Cup final. He used his trip to pay a visit to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, during which he vowed to support Palestinian unity.
So Ezekiel says Russia, Libya, and the Sudan would invade Israel in the last days. What are we having trouble with in the world? Russia, Libya, and Sudan.
Yes.
And then what you see is a relationship forming between Russia and Libya, Russia and the Sudan.
Yes.
And the prophecies of Ezekiel are clearly coming into focus, aren't
Yes.
they?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we can put up slide number 10, we'll go back to our giant map. And these are the nations invading Israel in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And what do you not see, Brother Jim, in Ezekiel's prophecy? You don't see the United States jumping to the defense of Israel.
Right.
And there's a lot of theories that are floated around as to why that's the case. You know, some have speculated maybe the rapture will occur and that will decimate the leadership of this country because, unlike other places of the world, Christians in the United States can excel up to high levels in business and politics. And so that's one possible theory. I hope that theory is true.
Well, yes, it'd be nice.
But this would take us really to the second part of our little treatment here on the nations against Israel. We talked just for a minute about the alliances. But let's move here to number 2, and this would be slide number 11, and let's talk about Trump's so-called Middle East peace plan.
So-called, yes.
And of course, everybody's kind of sitting on pins and needles because they really haven't rolled out the details yet. I assume they're not going to roll them out until after the midterm elections are over, coming up in November. And I want people to understand, generally speaking, I'm a supporter of the president. I've appreciated many of the things that he's done. But there's a number of tea leaves that I'm reading that make me very disturbed about this so-called Middle East peace plan. Now, you'll notice on the screen there that yellow area in the land of Israel, that's misnamed the West Bank.
Yes.
And it's misnamed because when you use the phrase West Bank, you're giving the perspective from adjacent Jordan.
Mm-hmm. That's
You're
right.
giving a Jordanian perspective. And words mean things.
Yes.
And that land is not to the east, not to the west of existing Israel, it's to the east.
Right.
The proper biblical designation for that area is Judea and Samaria.
Yeah.
And so the whole name of the game in the international community, and by the way, Israel won that in the Six-Day War in 1967 in a war of self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole name of the game is for Israel to give up that yellow territory and give it to the Palestinians.
Right.
Part of that would include giving up partial control of the city of Jerusalem. And this, of course, is what is called the Middle East Peace Plan.
Yeah.
And this is what the international community wants. And I'm somewhat suspicious of the Trump administration Middle East peace plan because I think it's bought into a lot of the premises here that the international community wants.
Yeah.
And I think the more that this is pushed, the more the prophecies are being set up for the world against Israel.
Yeah.
Because my pilot friends tell me it takes about 10 miles to shoot down an incoming plane. If you take away that yellow territory from Israel, the 10 miles are removed.
Mm-hmm.
And you put Israel in a position where she really can't defend herself.
Indefensible. Mm-hmm.
And this is what is called the Middle East Peace Plan. This is what the international community wants. And I'm very nervous that this is what the President of the United States wants as well.
Yeah.
And let me kind of reveal to you my awakening when it came to the Republican Party. I'm a Republican. I vote Republican. I've held my nose and voted for people I didn't like, just because they were Republican.
Yeah.
Because I thought the other party was worse.
Yeah.
But just because someone has an R in front of their name does not mean they're a conservative at all.
That's
and
correct.
I can take folks back to 1988 when G.H.W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, number 41,
Right.
beat Michael Dukakis in 1988, running on a national campaign of he's an ACLU liberal and I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to raise your taxes and I won't.
Yeah.
Well, then Bush gets into office, 1988 to 1992. What does he do? He raises taxes when he pledged he wouldn't do so.
Yeah.
He puts a guy like David Souter on the Supreme Court, who turned out to be one of our most liberal justices. And beyond that, he started to talk about this murky New World Order,
Yeah.
even though he ran on the platform of national sovereignty. And it was during this particular period of time that he started to push Israel into giving up territory. It related to loan guarantees. And unless Israel would capitulate that yellow territory related to settlements, they wouldn't get loans from the United States of America. And so when that happened, my eyes sort of awoke to the Republican Party in the sense that just because someone has an R in front of their name doesn't mean they're not a globalist, not a trilateralist, not a New World Order type of guy. In other words, the R&D is irrelevant.
It is.
I'm going to get behind candidates that I feel are constitutionalists and conservatives.
Right.
The party label means absolutely nothing.
Right.
So when this began to happen, this is why I started to become, somewhat suspicious of Donald Trump, even though I like him and support him. But just because he's got an R in front of his name doesn't mean he might not do something wrong with this Middle East peace plan.
Right.
And if we put up, let me give you this quote here before we put up slide 12. This is a citation from Saul Singer, Jewish Press, an article that goes back to 2014. And the title of it is George Bush, James Baker, and the News.
Jews.
And the Jews, excuse me. I guess we call it the Jews in the news for that matter.
Yeah, there you go.
But it's relating back to the attitude that the first Bush administration began to have towards the nation of Israel.
Right.
And how they started to do something once in office that they never said they would do when they campaigned in 1988. So do you mind reading that little excerpt to us?
All right. Beginning with George Herbert Walker Bush, America's 41st president, America's relationship with Israel has become progressively strained. It was Bush who cut off American loan guarantees from Israel to retaliate against Israel's settlement practices. It was also Bush's Secretary of State, James Baker, who infamously quipped, expletive, the Jews, they don't vote for us anyway.
Yeah, profanity, a quote, profanity,
Yeah.
you guys can fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Blank the Jews,
Yeah.
quote, blank the Jews, they don't vote for us anyway, close quote. Now that was a Republican administration that did that.
Yeah.
That wasn't Jimmy Carter.
No.
Jimmy Carter wasn't much better.
No.
Neither was the Obama administration nor the Clinton administration.
Yeah.
But that was a Republican administration, and that just goes to show you that an R in front of the name shouldn't seal the deal for anybody.
That's right.
It's the particular worldview of the
That's right.
people holding that specific office. So with that being said, Brother Jim, although I'm a supporter of Donald Trump and voted for him, and all things being equal, will likely vote for him again, I'm reading some tea leaves here concerning his Middle East peace process plan. And I'm wondering if this plan that he's about to get us into is going to push America into a posture against Israel. Of course, I'm open to that possibility prophetically because that's what the Bible says will exist in the last days, right?
Right.
Now, if we put up slide number 12, Trump did something great for the nation of Israel. He moved the American embassy at the end of 2018 from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which basically gave the nation of Israel confidence. He was expressing confidence that Jerusalem belongs to the Jews.
Right.
And we supported that. We applauded that. We have done shows on that. And basically it's the legal recognition of the Jewish capital after 50 years of dispute.
Yes.
And other nations began to follow suit.
That's true.
So a lot of people will look at Trump and say he's a very pro-Israel president. But here's my question, Brother Jim, and this is why I'm concerned. Was that a freebie? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah.
I mean, did he do all of that just for free? Or is there some kind of string attached to it that since he did this for Israel, now Israel has to do something for him?
Yeah.
Now, isn't this the president that we call the art of the deal president?
Yeah.
I mean, didn't he write a book called The Art of the Deal?
Yeah.
Isn't this guy a real estate magnate?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't he known for real estate deals, give and take, quid pro quo? And so as I'm reading the tea leaves, I'm wondering if this Middle East peace process plan that's about to be unveiled could be antithetical to the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
Now, let me give you some newspaper articles I'm seeing that lead me this direction in terms of suspicion. And let me say this, no one would be happier to be wrong about this than myself.
Yes. Amen.
I would love to be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is a president who actually does what he says, and when he says stuff, I'm listening.
Better pay attention.
Now here's an article from Haaretz, which I guess in Hebrew means the land.
That's
does
what
it
it
not?
means, the land.
And it's by Emir Tibbin and Noah Landau, and the title of it is Trump says Israel will pay a higher price. Higher price for the Jerusalem embassy move. It's dated August 23rd, 2018. And notice what Trump said while campaigning recently, I think in West Virginia.
While speaking at a rally in West Virginia on August 21st, U.S. President Donald Trump promised that Palestinians would get something very good in the future peace talks as it's their turn, since the U.S. had recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Trump pointed out that Jerusalem had been a stumbling block in peace talks between Tel Aviv and Ramallah until he took it off the table with U.S. Embassy move in May 2018. In past negotiations, they never got past Jerusalem, quoting Trump here. Now Israel will have to pay a higher price. The Palestinians will get something very good because it's their turn next, Trump said. Trump didn't offer any details on what the Palestinians will get in return.
Now, this is Trump speaking before an audience in West Virginia at,
Yeah.
I guess, a campaign type of rally. And he says, concerning the Palestinians, it's their turn next.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, what does that mean exactly?
It's scary.
It is scary.
It's so scary.
And,
Yeah,
and I remember I had the news on at my house. Normally it's like background noise. I don't really
Yeah.
pay attention to it. But I remember walking in the room. There was Trump on television, and I sat there with my own eyes and watched and heard him say this very thing live.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean here when he says Israel has to pay a higher price?
I don't know. It's scary.
I mean, is he saying, I gave you your embassy move, now you're obligated to give something to me, like Judea and Samaria, back to the Palestinians? Now, your Bible, my Bible, our Bible predicts the world against Israel.
It does.
Could this be sort of the mechanism that will be used to pull the United States, a long-standing ally of Israel, against Israel in the last days?
Perhaps a testing ground.
Perhaps a testing ground, yeah. And we have another article here by, let's see if I got the name right, Eric Cortellessa. Am I pronouncing that right?
Sounds good.
And this is from the Times of Israel. It's dated August 15th, 2018. And the title of it is U.S. warns no one will be fully pleased by the Israeli-Palestinian peace plan.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they're saying, here comes the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And all of you pro-Israel people, you're going to be disappointed. And some of you people on the Palestinian side of the ledger, you're going to be disappointed too. It's almost like they're psychologically preparing us for bad news against Israel. Does it read that way to you?
Yeah, it kind of makes me feel like, well, what's new?
Yeah.
You know, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been this way forever.
And I'm seeing replays of George Bush number 41.
Mm-hmm.
But would you mind reading that paragraph to us?
In joint statement, Trump's Mideast peace team says only path toward an agreement is for both sides to not get everything they want. That's a great way to start out, isn't it?
Yeah.
No one will be fully pleased with our proposal, but that's the way it must be if real peace is to be achieved, the officials said. Peace can only succeed if it is based on realities. The quote was attributed to U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley, U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman, White House Senior Advisor Jared Kushner, and Greenblatt.
Now, here's something that's very interesting. When Nikki Haley, who moved out of that position recently, what was her position? The UN ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
When she was in that position, you couldn't find a more pro-Israel person.
That's true.
In fact, we were delighted beginning in 2016 with her appointment.
Yes.
And the very pro-Israel, pro-Zionist statements that she made. In
That's
fact,
right.
we have a few of them recorded here from a Breitbart article, February 20th, 2017, by Adel Nazarian, if I'm pronouncing that right. It's entitled, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley Rips Security Council's Breathtaking Anti-Israel Bias. And when Nikki Haley made these comments and many subsequent comments like these, I was like, this is fantastic.
We were cheerleading, right?
Why don't you remind us of some of the statements that she's made there?
All right.
If you read that brief paragraph to us.
All right. Incredibly, the UN Department of Political Affairs has an entire department devoted to Palestinian affairs. Imagine that. There is not a division devoted to illegal missile launches from North Korea. There is no division devoted to the world's #1 state sponsor of terror, Iran. Instead, the meeting focused on criticizing Israel, the one true democracy in the Middle East. I'm here to say the United States will not turn a blind eye to this anymore. I'm here to underscore the ironclad support of the United States for Israel.
So very pro-Israel.
Man, I tell you what, that's good stuff.
That's good preaching.
Yeah.
Now, isn't it interesting that as we're getting closer and closer to rolling out this Middle East peace plan, that she suddenly resigns?
Yep.
The pro-Israel part of the Trump administration suddenly resigns. Now, I'm not a prophet. I don't have any extra insight that your average person doesn't have. I'm just looking at the tea leaves here.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump is going around in his campaign speeches and saying it's the Palestinians' turn next.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, Nikki Haley, one of the most aggressive voices for Israel in modern day politics, suddenly resigns from that position on the eve of them getting ready to roll out this Middle Eastern peace plan.
This is just a year, barely a year and a half after the previous statement, about no one's going to be pleased being
That's
made.
right. That's right.
That's not a very long time.
So, and then one other article that sort of jumped out to me. This is a very recent article this month, October 10th, 2018, from the Debka file.
Last week.
And this one is entitled Trump's Peace Plan for Two Palestinian States Kicks Off by Fuel Trucks for Gaza.
Yeah.
And it relates to Israel allowing trucks into her territory in terms of free trade on the grounds that we're going to have two states.
Yeah.
So it leads me to the conclusion that the groundwork for this Middle Eastern peace plan, which will divide the nation of Israel, is already in play. It just hasn't been announced yet to the public.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is this the kind of thing that's dragging America into a posture against Israel, which is what the prophet Zechariah predicted in the last days? Would you mind reading that excerpt to us? It's about 3 or so paragraphs.
All right.
You only have
Just
to read
the
the highlighted bold places. Thank you.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu won praise for U.S. Special Emmy negotiator Jason Greenblatt for letting the Qatar-funded fuel trucks go through to the Gaza Strip on August 9th. That is because it was the first step through the Debka file reports towards implementing the administration's Israel-Palestinian peace plan, partnered with Israel and Egypt to eventually separate the Gaza Strip from Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, to form two separate Palestinian entities.
Read that one more time. Well, I'll read it one more time. To form two separate Palestinian entities to eventually strip the Gaza Strip from Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Is that not talking about the division of the land of Israel?
Yeah, buddy. Absolutely.
And it's almost like the groundworks, the structure for this is already in place. It just hasn't been announced yet. Could that be why Nikki Haley was suddenly vacated from that particular office, or
makes one wonder,
resign quickly?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I have an intellect like our audience does. We can all read these tea leaves, can't we? Particularly when Trump's running around saying it's the Palestinians' turn next.
Yeah.
So please continue.
While Israeli politicians still argue about the pros and cons of the aging two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian dispute after decades of getting nowhere, Washington, Jerusalem, Cairo, and Doha are beginning to shape this wildly different two-state formula. The co-architect of the new U.S.-Israeli-Palestinian peace plan, President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, won unusual kudos on Tuesday, October 9th, from Nikki Haley. In her comments at the White House upon quitting the post of U.S. ambassador to the UN, she said, "Jared is such a hidden genius that no one understands," and added, "What I've done working with him on the Middle East peace plan, it is so unbelievably well done."
Now that's Nikki Haley saying that about Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who's the architect of this plan, supposedly. And I'll tell you, folks, the guy to keep an eye on in this whole thing, if you're interested, and you ought to be interested, because this has biblical prophetic ramifications. You ought to keep your eye on Jared Kushner. Don't keep your eye so much on Trump, although obviously you do pay attention to what he says. But really, the power behind the throne, as far as this deal
This
is
peace
concerned,
plan.
the architect is this Jared Kushner.
Mhm.
And to my mind, Jared Kushner has very much bought into what the international community wants to do, which is to divide the land of Israel, which
right.
is the removal of Judea and Samaria and part of Jerusalem from Israeli control, and give that back to the so-called Palestinians.
It's a little bit disappointing to see that she seems to be, you know,
Nikki Haley.
in agreement. Yeah, Nikki Haley in agreement with this plan.
And you kind of get the idea that she's been put under some kind of political pressure.
Yeah.
Why is this an issue, folks? Well, let's put up slide number 13. It's an issue because of Joel 3
Yes, sir.
and verse 2. You know, Joel, I think, is one of our earliest prophets. Maybe there's a debate on it, but I kind of lean more towards an early date of Joel. Maybe he prophesied in the 8th to the century, or maybe even earlier, BC. And he made a prophetic statement, this man Joel, this prophet Joel, concerning the division of the land of Israel in the last days. Would you mind reading that prophecy to us as we have up slide number 13?
Joel 3:2. I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Then I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my inheritance Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have divided up my land.
In context, this is talking about the last days judgment of God on the earth.
Yes.
It's God bringing judgment to the earth.
Yes.
Have you ever asked yourself what's going to bring God's judgment to the earth? Is it going to be they're teaching evolution in the schools? Is it going to be homosexuality and the same-sex agenda? Is it abortion? We're not downplaying any of those issues. They're all very significant. But according to Joel 3, verse 2, what brings the wrath of God in the tribulation period is the deliberate division of the land of Israel.
Yes. Yes.
And isn't it interesting that in that passage, God called that land my land?
My inheritance, yes.
He didn't even say it's Israel's land.
That's right.
He said it's my land.
That's right.
And he's the one, via the Abrahamic covenant, that
My land.
bequeathed it to the nation of Israel. And this is, in context, is a time when the nation of Israel is in disobedience. Because a lot of people say Israel has no claim to the land because she's in disobedience. Well, the context there is disobedience.
Yeah.
The judgment of God is coming forth.
Yeah.
And he says that what's going to trigger the wrath of God and bring the wrath of God to planet Earth is the deliberate division of the land of Israel. That's why this so-called peace process that the international community and apparently the Trump administration thinks is great, that apparently Bush number 41 thought was great, is a big deal to God. God doesn't want that land divided.
That's right.
And yet prophecy predicts that it will be divided. If we can put up slide number 14 just for a minute, I want to show people how crazy this idea is to divide the land of Israel in the hope of gaining peace.
They keep crying peace, peace, but there will be no peace.
Exactly.
Because they're doing just the opposite of what God says. They're dividing up the land.
And God doesn't seem to take it too well, does he? But anyway, in this map, see that green area there? What's that green area represent? Those are Islamically controlled countries.
Right, yes.
Those are countries controlled by the religion of Islam, which gives them a theological motivation to attack Israel.
It's kind of scary.
Because they, in Islam, believe, I think errantly, that that is where Muhammad allegedly ascended to go back to be with Allah. So Islam recently has claimed Jerusalem as one of their holy cities.
Right.
Even though the name Jerusalem doesn't appear a single time in the Quran. They find some obscure reference to the furthest mosque and pretend that that sounds like Jerusalem. Whereas in Hebrew Bible, the name Jerusalem is used 800 times, at least in the Old Testament, 600, another 200 maybe in the New Testament. So what's that green area? Islamic countries. What's that little red dot? It's the nation of Israel.
Yeah, that one you can barely see.
You can barely see it, and I had to put that arrow with Israel
where it
pointing in, because you might not even see that red dot if you haven't had your prescription changed recently.
That's right.
So what does the international community want? What is the Middle East peace plan all about? Well, Israel needs to give up a little bit more, and then we'd be happy.
Yeah,
that's the mindset.
Yeah.
And here's the deal, folks. The event that's going to start the tribulation period is going to be a peace treaty.
That's right.
Between the Antichrist and unbelieving Israel.
Yeah.
Daniel 9, verse 27a. Now, obviously, Israel is not going to reach out to some political ruler like the Antichrist to guarantee her survival unless she has already been pushed by the international community into a corner where the so-called West Bank has been removed, and she only has now, 9 miles of width, something like that. She's in a strategically indefensible position. So now she's got to reach out to the Antichrist for help.
That's right.
So this so-called Middle East peace process, not only is it crazy, not only is it going to incur the wrath of God and bring his wrath during the tribulation period, but it's also setting the stage for this peace treaty, which is coming following the rapture, which will start or inaugurate the tribulation period.
It's like a crack in the dam, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is this peace process is the crack starting to open up that hole.
And, here we have the President of the United States, who is a real estate deal guy, wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. Probably would love to go down in history as the guy who resolves this issue. Analyzing the whole thing and with Jared Kushner at his side, analyzing the whole thing from a real estate perspective. The fact of the matter is he's tampering with forces he can't possibly comprehend outside of divine revelation.
Right.
See, when we as biblicists look at this whole thing, we're seeing prophecy. We're seeing the effect this is going to have on the United States of America, because God is very clear, I'll curse those who curse Israel, and I'll bless those who bless Israel.
Right.
And we're wondering how this is going to trigger the events of the tribulation period, how it's setting the stage for the 70th week of Daniel and the peace treaty. I guarantee, unless the president is surrounded by advisors like hopefully Mike Pence, who is giving him this point of view, he's not looking at it the way we're looking at it. It's just a basic real estate deal. Now, that may work for casinos, but it doesn't work in this situation because of things God has decreed and covenanted.
Amen.
And so I guess, Brother Jim, one of the reasons I wanted to do this prophecy update is I wanted to show people that the pattern that the prophets predicted of the world against Israel is coming together right before our very eyes, where not only are alliances forming against Israel from predicted countries, the countries are in place, Israel is in place, and the alliances are forming amongst those countries, like between Russia and Libya, Russia and the Sudan, and we could have gone on and talked about other alliances.
That's right.
But beyond this, you have a situation where even the late, great United States of America is naively being pulled into this posture against Israel as well, in the name of peace in the Middle East. So, and I was going to try to today get into the Golan Heights issue. I think we're going to have to save that for next week because we're out of time.
It's good stuff.
But I want to show people next time we get together that why doesn't the United States show up in this Ezekiel 38 and 39 war? Here's the answer, and I didn't know this until about a month ago. Legally, if the invasion happens into the Golan Heights, and we'll be showing next week that it has to happen into the Golan Heights because it has to come into the mountains of Israel. That's the most mountainous region within Israel. The Golan Heights is sort of a buffer between
Yes.
Israel and Syria. And
Right.
where are the big three right now? In Syria.
Yeah.
Russia, Turkey, and Iran.
Mm-hmm.
In Syria. So the only thing that's a buffer is the Golan Heights.
Mm-hmm.
The current posture of the United Nations legally is that the Golan Heights, which Israel won in a self-defensive war in 1967, does not legally belong to Israel.
Right.
It belongs to Syria. And the United States of America, and I'll be showing you the direct quote from Bolton, who is the
Mm-hmm.
national security advisor to Donald Trump. The legal position of the United States, legally speaking, is following what the United Nations resolutions say. In other words, the leaders of the United States of America do not believe that the Golan Heights belong to Israel.
Right.
They're following what the United Nations thinks.
Yep.
I'll show you the direct laws and the direct quotes next time. And I'm thinking this, Brother Jim, is this the reason why the United States doesn't show up anywhere in Ezekiel 38 and 39?
Interesting.
I mean, I'd much rather believe this scenario that we're raptured and the country is decimated when these things happen, but I'm starting to think differently about this.
Yeah.
Because the prophets predict all nations against
Yes.
Israel, and that would even include the late, great United States of America.
That's right.
So I know this is a lot for people to think about, but this is what these prophecy updates are all about.
Wow.
Brother Jim, do you have any thoughts or comments before we spend a couple of moments getting to some comments and questions from our viewers?
Yeah, I do think it's fascinating, really, when you realize that just, even 75 years ago, I mean, we probably don't even have to go that far back, but 75 years ago, nobody had any idea that all of these things were going to come together like this. So you read these prophecies, and people, they have a choice to believe the Word of God and what it says, or go with man's way of thinking about things. Well, I'm going to choose God, because God always demonstrates that His prophecy is true.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, if you live long enough, if you wait long enough, it's always manifested. It's fascinating. I can even remember as a young Christian reading about prophetic events and think, well, how is all this going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
How is all this going to come together? And just in my lifetime, my short lifetime, I've seen just step after step after step move us on that chessboard, getting those pieces in place. It's fascinating to see this happen.
And that's why I start off with Zechariah 12:10, the piercing of the Messiah.
Yeah.
Which at the time of being written probably seemed crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And how tempting it would have been for people to spiritualize that and say, well, it's not literal.
Yeah.
And yet, as you said, if you give history enough time, it eventually catches up to what God said would happen. And the piercing under Rome really did happen, that usurped from Israel the right to execute her own criminals.
Yes.
What we're saying, folks, is this Zechariah's same prophecies are coming into focus right now.
That's right.
Related to the second coming.
Yes.
One person writes in and says, do you pronounce that Khashoggi or Khashoggi? I think that's the journalist from Saudi Arabia, if I have that right, that was abducted recently in Turkey. I'm not sure if I have my facts right on this, but they ask, will stuff related to him lead to a closer alignment of Muslim Brotherhood? And how do you see it impacting Muslim Brotherhood tactics in government in the U.S.? Well, it's no doubt that Islam has ascendancy in our culture and is getting more and more of a voice.
Yeah.
You have people like Keith Ellison, who now holds, even though he beat the tar out of his girlfriend recently, hold key positions in the Democratic Party. Judge Kavanaugh, what if he had done, they're upset of what he said at the Punch Bowl in the 1980s. And here Keith Ellison is, using his girlfriend as a punching bag within the last, month or two, and nobody seems to care about what
coverage
he
on
thinks.
that.
So I think with the ascendancy of Islam, you're going to start seeing more and more of a turning of the United States against Israel. Keith Ellison, I should have explained, is a Muslim. He's one of the highest ranking Muslims in our country that holds elective office. If my facts are right, I think he's currently running for Attorney General of the state of, I want to say, Minnesota.
Well, just look at England. Look what's going on in England, and we're not far from it.
Yeah, and you know, Europe, the cradle of the Protestant Reformation. and now it's an post-Christian, predominantly Muslim society.
We even have it just north of the border here
That's
in
exactly
Canada.
right. That's exactly right. Another person says, is that why Nikki Haley resigned? Or will she be in a presidential campaign? The answer to that is I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of reading the tea leaves.
Mm-hmm.
I hope she's in a presidential campaign. She's got my vote.
Right.
But I think that this resignation of hers, she's very pro-Israel, is very suspicious to me. I mean, why does she resign so quickly before the unveiling of this plan?
Right.
Maybe they looked at her as some kind of obstacle to the plan,
Yeah.
which wants to divide the city of Jerusalem and the nation of Israel, something her comments indicated she would not be in favor of.
Well, she didn't make a lot of friends when she was on
Right.
the UN.
That's right.
In the UN, so.
Yeah. In fact, I would watch her speak, and you could sometimes the camera would pan the other nations, and they just held her in derision.
Yeah.
Another person says, I certainly hope that this is not the reason. Would Pence understand the importance of not giving land away? One would hope. I don't know what Mike Pence believes on prophecy. When Mike Pence was the governor, was he the governor of Indiana? Do I have that correct?
I think that's correct.
There was something he did that I found very disturbing. It related to a religious freedom law that he signed, which would have made it more difficult for the same-sex agenda to sue private businesses and establishments and bakeries who wanted to hold to traditional marriage. I remember the same-sex movement got hysterical about that, and they said, we're going to ban different athletic events from being, held in your state because you've done this. And Pence, if you go back into the record, folded on that.
Yeah.
So I'd much rather have Pence there than somebody else. But my hope is not in Mike Pence.
That's right.
All of these guys, no matter how Christian they are, have a tendency to fold under pressure.
That's true.
And so that's sort of how I look at Donald Trump. I support Donald Trump. I voted for Donald Trump. I pray for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is my president. But I wouldn't put it past him to try to go down in history as the president who carves out the art of the deal.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a feather in his cap from the human perspective to fix this problem?
Yeah.
But of course, the problem is he's analyzing it from a real estate deal and not from a theological, prophetic
exactly
perspective.
Right.
That's the
Yes,
problem.
and
that's why I'm hoping people around him, like Mike Pence, could make him aware of these issues.
Amen. We need to pray for his counselors and advisors.
That's exactly right. Another person writes in, and it looks like they wrote a term paper here. So I'll try to read this real fast, and then we're going to have to sign off. One person says, I was wondering what thoughts you might have regarding White House correspondent William Koenig's proposition that he lays out in his book, Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. Koenig attempted to show the relationship between U.S. mistreatment of Israel and subsequent natural disasters, economic setbacks, and political crises. According to Koenig, God brings judgment against any nation involved in dividing up his land. His proposition is based on Joel 3:1 and 2, which says, and I don't have to read all that because we've read it already, and of course Joel 3 verse 2 says God is upset in the tribulation period because they've divided my land.
Right.
I will say that and I know Bill Koenig, when I first heard him present this idea, I was highly skeptical. And I was like, okay, Bill, prove it to me. But it is, and I haven't done the research myself, so I don't really know exactly what to believe about it. But he does a pretty interesting job showing that when the United States does things like it's about to do related to Israel, that storms, hurricanes, and things of that nature just materialize out of thin air and hit our coastlines. And he's got this documented right down to the day in event after event after event after event, going back to the first Bush administration. So it's sort of like, how many times in your life can you be hit by lightning?
Right.
And so I find Bill Koenig's thesis very, very interesting. Now, would I go around personally promoting this? Probably not, because I haven't done the research. So it's not yet a firm conviction in my heart. But I do know this, based on my studies of the Bible, it doesn't go well
Yeah,
for nations
that's right.
that come against Israel.
That's right.
And you can go back into the scripture and you could see world powers come and go, and it's almost like clockwork.
Mm-hmm.
God basically removes his blessing from those nations
Yeah.
almost at the specific point in time that they turn against Israel,
Mm-hmm.
because of what God says in Genesis 12 verse 3, I'll curse
That's
those who
right.
curse you. And we can look at Egypt,
That's right.
Assyria, Medo-Persia,
Mm-hmm.
Babylon, Greece,
Yep.
Rome. We could even look at modern countries like Spain,
Mm-hmm.
Britain,
Yes.
Hitler's Nazi Germany, the
Yes.
Third Reich, which was supposed to last 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like clockwork. Every nation that comes against Israel finds itself on the ash heap of history.
That's right.
And that's why I'm sort of open to the Koenig conjecture. I don't know if you have any
Well, there
thoughts on that.
certainly sounds like there's a connection, right?
Yeah.
Now, how much of a connection? I'm like you. I'm a little hesitant
Right.
to jump in with both feet, but I'm like you. My feeling is I always want to err on the side of Israel.
Yeah. And we also know that we're living in a fallen world. The world is in travail, Romans
Yes.
8. And a lot of
Yes.
hurricanes could be related to that also.
Right.
So it's like, how closely do you connect the dots?
Yeah.
But the Koenig conjecture to me is very interesting to think about.
It is.
And this same person says, by the way, this just might be a coincidence, but it does make me wonder. August 24th, a U.S. delegation led by Jared Kushner, President Trump's advisor and son-in-law, met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to renew the stalled Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Kushner restated Trump's commitment to finding a lasting solution to the conflict through, quote, an ultimate deal. That's sort of the point that we're trying to make. Trump's deal was to be a comprehensive Middle East peace plan, which included the Saudis. The U.S. will be committed to defending the Sunni Arabs against Iran, and Israel was to receive a normalization of relationships. But what would that cost Israel? Question mark.
Mm-hmm.
Israel was giving up a portion of God's covenant land. The same day the first major hurricane to hit Texas in 12 years was officially formed. And we all know what devastation Harvey caused. Well, we know a little bit about Harvey,
Yes,
don't
we
we?
do.
Living
Mm-hmm.
in the Houston area. Again, it's an interesting point to consider.
Yes.
I'm not sure how dogmatic I personally would be on something like that. But when Bill Koenig presents this, it's a very, very interesting proposition that, although not a firm conviction that I would preach, is certainly something that I think we need to think about. And
Might
consider.
want to cause us to take pause. Huh?
Yeah. So, prophecy update for the last days. A, red heifer. B, surveillance society. C, the world coming against Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the world coming against Israel through alliances forming against Israel. And even it could be captured in terms of pulling the United States in terms of Trump's Middle East peace plan.
Yeah.
And the next time we're together, we'll take a look at the fact that the United States has no legal obligation whatsoever to defend Israel should Israel be attacked in the Golan Heights, because the United States doesn't even believe that Israel owns the Golan Heights. Yeah. And we know that the attack has to come into the Golan Heights because Ezekiel's very clear that it's going to come against the mountainous regions of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll sign off, and we would invite people to continue to like us literally and metaphorically on Facebook. If you believe in the message of this ministry, just hit share.
Yes.
And expand our sphere of influence that way by putting us into your friends' lists. Also, we would invite people to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just go to Andy Wood's Pastor's Point of View.
Yes.
And it should take you there. And just sign up for a free subscription. And every time we post something on YouTube, you'll get a notification. In fact, this presentation will be up on YouTube momentarily. I would also tell people to double check your YouTube subscription. YouTube has been playing some games with us, Brother Jim, and other people.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a Christian message or a biblically based message, I notice they have a tendency to take people that think they're subscribed and to unsubscribe them.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this to kind of deliberately hold down your subscription numbers. And there have been a number of people that have written to me and said, hey, I thought I was subscribed to your YouTube channel and now I'm unsubscribed. So if you sense any hanky-panky out there, folks, just go on and resubscribe.
Resubscribe.
And we're getting close to 10,000 subscribers.
Goodness gracious.
So help
Wow.
kick us across the finish line, would you? We may have a big 10,000 party.
Hey, that's a plan.
Wouldn't that be kind of cool?
Could we have banners?
We could get some banners,
some balloons, and
bring some snacks in here.
have a big cake with 10,000.
Wouldn't that be? How would you blow out all those candles? But it's not a birthday cake, so I guess we wouldn't have to blow them out.
That's true. Yeah.
Anyway, Brother Jim, do you have any concluding thoughts or comments? You want to share the gospel?
Well, I just want to thank people so much for tuning in and sharing these programs with others. I get calls and emails all the time from people, from you folks, about how blessed you are by these videos. And so we just encourage you to continue to pray for the ministry here, pray for Pastor Andy, pray for his health, and pray for his dear wife, who is the program manager, and she's the one that makes all this happen for us. So we really need your prayers. We appreciate you all, and we pray that God will just bless you mightily.
Yep. And I was in recently Canada.
Yeah. Let's see, Denver.
Yeah, Denver and Minnesota and Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So this month I've been traveling a lot, and everywhere I went, people said, "Hey, we watch your stuff. We watch Pastor's Point of View." And so we know God is blessing the work that we're doing here with very humble means.
Yes.
And so we give him full praise and glory.
Absolutely.
Anyway, that's enough talking for today. And we're going to see you next week as we talk about the Golan Heights. God bless you.
God bless you.